Go Jackets.
Hello all, welcome to WreckTalk. So, there's a ton going on in college football right now, and I just feel like conference realignment has just kind of been talked to death. I mean, everyone that does college football on YouTube has made like 10 videos on conference realignment. I probably won't do another one unless something more concrete kind of comes out. But along with how the landscape of college football is evolving and changing, we've probably never, I'm not even going to say probably, aside from like leaving the SEC, being an independent, and then becoming a part of the ACC, Georgia Tech has never gone through a time of so much change as it is right now. A ton of our staff has been turned over. We've had a ton of transfers in and out. Even our executive staff has changed quite a bit. And, Georgia Tech is trying to find its place in modern college football where, truth be told, Tech has probably been behind the times as far as where the landscape of college football has been for the last 5 or 10 years. So, I want to talk about that and really just a review. Like, so much has changed. News is coming out every week. I just wanted to kind of do a recap of all the coaching changes, all the transfers, all the recruits, all the executive staff in one video. So if you want a concise list of everything that's going on in Georgia Tech in the since Geoff Collins has been fired, this is the video for you. Now, before we move on, if you're not aware, there's memberships available. They're $5 a month. They give you special emojis you can use in the live chats for the live shows. We'll have the Georgia Tech live show this Sunday at 8 p.m. with C-Dog. It's a great way to support the channel. We'll also have super chats for the first time, so you can super chat now during the live shows. And I'll pick one random member, I think every month, and you'll get to pick a video topic that WreckTalk does. Also, we have, if you want to support the show in other ways, we have a PayPal link in the description and a CashApp link in the description. I would love to do some more interviews leading into the season. So, first I want to back up and say, okay, well, how did we get here? So, Paul Johnson, really he was what he was. I think he was, a good coach, but due to the style of offense he ran, we were able to really outperform our talent and probably win games we shouldn't have. But along with that came really a gap in recruiting between Tech and a lot of other teams in the top half of college football. And when your rivals are Georgia and Clemson, I just don't think you can let the gap in recruiting get as out of whack as it did. Now, Paul Johnson won a ton of football games. Paul Johnson is a Hall of Fame college football coach. But, Mojo talked about it on the last live show that was on the 2009 ACC championship team. Paul just really wasn't concerned with recruiting. Now, he did raise some alarm bells. He said, hey, look at what some of these other schools have facilities-wise, recruiting staff-wise, recruiting budget-wise. Like, how can we compete with that? And I think he was right in that too. I mean, you're not going to compete in recruiting with half the staff, half the budget, half the facilities. It's not going to happen. So, and we'll bring that full circle in a little bit. But toward the end of Paul's career, things had started tailing off. We missed our first bowl game in like 17, 18 years, right after a great season where we went to the Orange Bowl. And evidently Stansbury had convinced Paul to coach another year or two past what he ended up coaching. which is kind of head scratching. It makes you think Stansbury just did not want to make a hire, or maybe he was gun shy about it. The guy he wanted wasn't available. Who knows? Now, for whatever reason, we were able to be competitive every so often with Georgia. This is what got Chan Gailey fired. Most likely, is Gailey just couldn't. He couldn't beat Georgia. He never beat Georgia while he was at Georgia Tech. And Mark Richt really took Georgia to a height they hadn't been to before having him. And we suffered some pretty bad blowout losses to Georgia along with not beating them. Now, Paul was able to go to Athens and beat Georgia every 3 years or so. Beat Kirby in 2016 in Kirby's first year. Beat some really talented Georgia teams. But toward the end of Paul's career, like particularly with Clemson, it just was not competitive. I remember being a student, it was 2016 or 2017, and just could not get a positive yardage play on offense against Clemson. So that leads us into the Geoff Collins era. And, it makes me think of like Star Wars, where Collins is kind of Anakin, and he was supposed to bring balance to the Force at Georgia Tech, and he did the exact opposite. But he taught a good game, and there were some things I think Collins was right about. As far as marketing Tech, marketing Atlanta, playing to the strengths of where Georgia Tech's located and its academics. Look, most people are not going to play in the NFL. And if that doesn't work out for you, like there's not a degree you're going to get at Tech that doesn't set you up for success. But along with that, you got to be putting kids in the NFL if you want to step up your recruiting. That's one of the most important things to recruits. 4 or 5 star recruits, even your higher 3 stars. So Geoff comes in, big overhaul in the offense. We have like 15 running backs on roster, 4 or 5 wide receivers. And we knew it was going to be, a massive overhaul. And that's one thing that people kind of still point to of you didn't give Collins enough time, or you got to realize how difficult it is to turn around a triple option roster. And to me, it really wasn't that. It was that throughout Collins' tenure, well, one, I think we talked about on the live show, he hired one of the worst offensive coordinators you could in Dave Patnode. Dave Patnode leaves Tech, goes to Old Dominion. I don't know exactly what happened. If it's for personal issues, I apologize, but it's just weird. He steps down 3 weeks before the season. Our offense was absolutely horrible the whole time. And the big thing is it didn't get any better. Offensive and defense. This is the worst stretch in Georgia Tech history. 3-9, 3-9, 3-9. And we seem to get worse every year. Collins was doing silly things, 3 practices on 3 different fields. And kind of after the first year, we all give him a pass on the first year. Second year, things don't seem to be getting better. We're like, all right, well, definitely in the third year. And in the third year, it seemed to be the worst year. We get blown out 100-0 for the last 2 games between UGA and Notre Dame. Georgia basically sells out our stadium. It's probably 90% Georgia fans, which is probably the lowest time. I was at that game. It was probably the lowest I've ever been as a Georgia Tech fan or felt. And Collins created that. So he gets to start the 4th year. And it's really just more of the same. It's so bad that not only did we fire Collins, we fire Todd Stansbury, who hired him, which you got to be pretty bad at your job when the guy that hired you gets fired with you. And that's kind of where I want to start. So we were looking for a head coach. Brent had done well as the interim. And we're looking for an AD. So the first hire we got to make is an AD. We fired Todd Stansbury. And I have an Excel sheet here I'm looking at of all our hires. And I've starred hires that I think are home run hires. And the first one is Jay Batt. We hired Jay Batt from Alabama. He's an executive, like director of operations or something. This is a guy that's seen what the absolute heights of college football are at Alabama and what they need to be. He's someone that's already waded this tumultuous, kind of confusing NIL landscape. I think it's an absolutely fantastic hire. It seems like he has found the coffee because he's hired his head coach. He's got a lot of things in the works. But the first and possibly most important hire that Georgia Tech had to make, I think that they got it right. And you'd be pressed to find anyone that thinks this is a bad hire. Now we're going to see, basically Jay Batt's going to have to earn his money. So I think he made the right hire. And Brent Key, there's some people that disagree with that. But really where we're going to see how he earns his money is, how does he turn the NIL landscape at Georgia Tech? Now he's created the Tech Way, which this channel has used to get interviews with Zach Pryor and Clayton Powell-Lee. But NIL is far more than that, So how does he navigate the NIL landscape? How does he transform Georgia Tech to fit within the landscape of college football and the direction it's going? And the biggest thing being how good of a fundraiser is he? Now, we've gone from I'll just say it this way. Like, it surprised the full out of me that Georgia Tech was third in the ACC last year in recruiting budget, behind only Clemson and North Carolina. Georgia Tech is outspending every other team as far as just pure recruiting budget in the ACC. Now, that doesn't take into account NIL and other stuff, and that's why I said he's going to have to figure that out. The other big thing, and possibly the biggest thing, is how does he navigate the conference realignment atmosphere? If the ACC devolves and we're just left with our thingy in our hand, that's going to be horrible. Now, I've said I've given Batt the benefit of the doubt that he's already made calls and is positioning Tech for whatever might happen. But that's hugely important, that we're not reacting to what happens, but we've proactively got plans in place for what we're going to do. So, we interviewed several people. Evidently, we reached out to Dion. I don't think he was interested given kind of the recruiting restrictions. But we promote Brent Key. So I just want to go through every coach excuse me, that has left Georgia Tech since this. So obviously Geoff Collins. Now, he 3 weeks ago was on a podcast I might react to, talking some stuff. Look out for that in the future. By the way, if you're not a part of the Discord, join that. I would love to get you guys video ideas. I might even make a channel for it. One of the first things that happened, well, the first guy that left before Key was promoted from interim to head coach, Mike Daniels, the running back coach, steps down and resigns almost immediately when Brent was named the interim. Now, to me, it seems like there was some bad blood. There were some rumors floating around that maybe there was some, I'll just say it this way and leave it alone. There was some exposure issues with Mike Daniels as far as the university was concerned. Perhaps he didn't step down as much as he was asked to leave. But he leaves. Now, I don't think he's been hired by anyone. Him and Collins were posting pictures on Twitter a few months ago, having their people that don't know nothing about college football convention at Jeff's house. The next position or coach that we parted ways with was offensive coordinator Chris Long. I apologize, guys. I cannot um, shake this cough, and talking for a long time is rough for me, but we'll try and get through it. Anyways, we get rid of Chris Long as our offensive coordinator. Now, evidently, Key didn't have or had little to no faith in Long. The rumor was, and I think Hamilton said on 680 The Fan, that Long was calling plays for at least the last 2 games of the year. So it doesn't seem like Key really had a lot of faith in Chris Long's play calling abilities. And we end up having to pay him $750,000, I think. Got my Olaf cup. Which is pretty hefty to pay your coordinator on top of the basically $12 million we're already paying Collins. He's now at Louisville, if you haven't seen, as a offensive analyst. We also get rid of Del Alexander, who is now at UNLV. Obviously, we promote Key. He was the offensive line coach. Linebacker coach Jason Seymour, and honestly, this one hurts. I don't know, was it On3, I think, voted him some accolade like linebacker coach of the year. And if you look at like what he did with Charlie Thomas and Ace Ely, he did a fantastic job. I hate to see Coach Boogie leave. It's interesting because it seems like we kind of demoted him to special teams coordinator, and we brought in Kevin Scherer as linebackers coach. And Seymour ends up going to Marshall as their defensive coordinator. Again, I hate to see him leave. I think he was great for Georgia Tech. And it really says something about his abilities, because Marshall's not a joke team. That as bad as Tech's been, that he's able to get promoted as a defensive coordinator. Now, we also get rid of defensive line coach Larry Knight. He's at Toledo now under the same role. So that's the coaches out. What coaches did we bring in? Obviously, Brent Key was promoted. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think the second best offensive coordinator hire in the cycle, Buster Faulkner, who was an offensive analyst at University of Georgia, appears to have done wonders for Stetson Bennett, getting him to play well above what his perceived potential was. And that hire is already paying dividends. We're having recruits visit campus that would not otherwise have visited campus. Pivotal in bringing in like Brett Seether and Blaylock from UGA. I'm sure pivotal in even bringing in other transfers. So bring in Buster Faulkner. We hire Jeep Wade as the offensive line coach. Bring him in from App State. I'm not sure how that'll work out. I mean, obviously Key has faith in him if we hired him. By the way, Buster Faulkner is my second home run hire Georgia Tech has made. And we're going to get into the third one. Wide receivers coach Josh Crawford. This is a guy with deep recruiting ties in the state of Georgia. He coached at several big-name high schools in Georgia. And that's really where we've got to start changing the dynamic at Georgia Tech. We've got to be able to recruit our own state far better. Like, you can only sign so many kids if you're Georgia, Clemson, North Carolina, Auburn, Florida. We've got to be able to land on some of these recruits. And bringing in Josh Crawford is a step in the right direction. Now, I think he's also a talented wide receivers coach. He comes from Western Kentucky. Yeah, I keep wanting to say Western Carolina, but he comes from Western Kentucky, and I think that's a home run hire for Georgia Tech. And that seems to already be paying dividends. You look at all the wide receivers we've brought in, um, it's phenomenal. Georgia Tech, I've said this before, might have one of the deepest wide receiver rooms in the ACC this year. Time will tell. We bring in running back coach Norval McKenzie from Vandy, which is interesting because we got him to leave his alma mater. He graduated from Vandy, played at Vandy. And if you're following him on Twitter, man, this guy is tearing up the Georgia Tech recruiting trail, and seems to be a really good hire as well. As mentioned before, we bring in linebacker coach Kevin Scher. Now, this is a guy that was released by the New York Giants, I believe, as their linebacker coach. He had been the defensive coordinator at Tennessee, actually has a national title ring, is director of player development or player personnel at Alabama. Guy with a ton of experience, and obviously coaching linebackers at the next level. So, seems like a good hire as well. Our next home run hire, though, defensive line coach Marco Coleman. This is kind of a bizarre. Well, it speaks to just how little faith people had in Geoff Collins that worked for him. Leaves, goes to Michigan State for a year. Soon as the stink of Collins is erased from the program, Marco Coleman comes right back. This is a guy that has a national title ring with your Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket. So, absolute home run hire. I think he was 12th overall pick in the NFL draft year he was drafted. Absolutely love it having Marco Coleman back. Now, we also new position. So Geoff Collins was also the recruiting, not recruiting coordinator, the special teams coordinator, and we all saw how much of a turd sandwich that was. We bring in Ricky Brumfeld from Florida International University. I don't know a ton about him. All I can say is special teams can't be any worse than what they were under Collins. And even, we Band-Aided it when when Key took over. We basically just took three of the biggest guys we had and had them blocked for punts, but coverage definitely suffered. So, if we're going to take a step forward next year, we got to take a big step forward in special teams. All right, so look at the off-the-field coaches. We already talked about Jay Batt. Kind of surprising for most Tech people. We fire Louis Caralla as our strength and conditioning coach. He seemed to be well liked. There must have been a difference in development opinion between him and Key. We bring in A.J. Artis from University of Central Florida. Again, time will tell how much how good of a hire that is. He had been in a similar role at Tennessee though, so he's been at some bigger name programs. Next home run hire I think Tech has made, general manager Aaron Joe. We hire him from Alabama. This is a guy that played at Georgia Tech. He knows what it means to be a Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket. And the first person I heard say that really they thought this was a home run hire was Bryce Kuhn. He said his opinion was this is really going to pay dividends for Georgia Tech. I would think in recruiting. So now when Mike Daniels stepped down as our running backs coach right after Key was named interim, Donald Hill-Ely took over as running backs coach before we hired Norval McKenzie. He is now the chief of staff at Georgia Tech. Now, don't ask me exactly what that person does or means, but he's promoted to chief of staff. Now, these two guys, we two home run hires in my opinion. We hired two Georgia high school legends. One, Bill Stewart, who was at North Gwinnett. He's a defensive analyst for linebackers. In 6 seasons of coaching Georgia high school football, he went 60-19 and won a 7A state title. Now, if you don't think having a guy like that on staff is going to step up your recruiting with the relationships he has with Georgia high school coaches, you're missing the boat. I think Georgia, if you just look at like per capita, is the richest recruiting ground in the country. It's either that or Florida. Maybe Florida's number one, Georgia's number two. But it's actually something Mojo talked about in the last live show. Like, yeah, there's more 4 or 5-star recruits in Texas and California, but they have far larger populations than Georgia. So, absolute move in the right direction with hiring Bill Stewart. And then we hire, if there is a Georgia high school legend, it's certainly this guy, Tim McFarland, is the director of high school relations. Comes from Fellowship Christian, has won 4 state titles in the state and like a 20, 30-year coaching career in high school. But yeah, I mean, that's all of these things are a step, I think, in the right direction for getting Tech where it needs to go with these hires. Now, not publicized, really talked about, we hired director of football operations, Josh Thompson from App State. Maybe that was, I don't know if Jeep Wade came first or him, but I'm sure that those hires are related. Excuse me. Now I want to talk about like the roster turnover. So I'm going to go through players that we're losing, players that we're bringing in, both in portal and recruiting. So one of the bigger ones, and I know people probably won't agree that this is much of a loss. I do. We lose Jeff Sims. He transfers to Nebraska. And we lose Puma John, who goes to UMass. Now we bring in Haynes King. Sorry again, had to give my voice a rest. It's getting out of control. But we bring in Haynes King, a guy with what appears to be a ton of potential that hasn't lived up to it, was in a pretty tumultuous situation with everything that was going on Texas A&M. I mean, Texas A&M has had kind of a mass exodus of talent out of there. Is anyone that was a part of that number one recruiting class still on their roster? Wouldn't surprise me if they're not. But not a lot of turnover at the quarterback position. And what you'll see is like Tech, as I was looking at this, is a very young team. We didn't lose many to graduation last year at all. At running back, we lose Dylan McDuffie in the portal to Kansas. Right after the spring game, Antonio Martin hit the portal. He has not found a landing spot yet. Hassan Hall graduates and has made the squad with the Cleveland Browns. Now we bring in transfer Travion Cooley from Louisville and recruit Evan Dickens from IMG, who's already enrolled. Obviously, he was in the spring game, looked pretty good. At wide receiver, and this one hurts, we lose Nate McCullum to the pieces of garbage at UNC.
A career of a lifetime. Right down the drain, kid. I hope you love it. You just sold your soul to the devil.
Anyway, probably our best wide receiver. That was a total NIL thing. It'd be nice if people had to like publish what they're paying kids to come to their school like that, because I'd like to see it. We also lose Ryan King in the portal to Eastern Carolina. Kalani Norris, wide receiver, transfers to Middle Tennessee State. E.J. Jenkins graduates, got picked up by the Jets, which is nice to see. He was the big 6'7" wide receiver Tech had that no one knew why he wasn't playing tight end. And Malachi Carter gets picked up by the Bengals as undrafted. Now, we bring in Abdul Janae from Duquesne. Should be a pretty talented, big-bodied kid. Christian Leary from Alabama, everyone's excited about. A lot of speed. Chase Lane, a kid that is still finishing his coursework at Texas A&M. and was pivotal into bringing in Haynes King and the linebacker we brought in, we'll get into. And another big name, Dominique Blaylock, comes in from UGA. Another kid that's really talented that just has not seen his potential. He's had injury issues at Georgia as well. And unlike his quarterback, actually graduated. Now on the recruiting side, we bring in Zion Taylor from Norcross, very talented kid. Eric Singleton Jr. from Douglasville, and Bryce Dobson from Brookwood. I would say all three of them will end up seeing the field. Not this year, but at some point. All three of them are pretty talented kids. Now, on the offensive line, we lose R.J. Adams to someplace called Lackawanna, like university. Paula Vaipulu transfers to North Texas. And something that was just kind of confusing, Pierce Quick, who had transferred from Alabama to Tech, just retires from football. He's going back to Alabama to finish up his degree. No one really knows what exactly happened with that. Maybe he was just tired of playing football. Maybe he was tired of going 3-9, but it's just head scratching because you'd think if he was tired at Tech, he would just transfer again. But anyways, we lose Pierce Quick, which really hurts on the offensive line. Now we bring in transfer Jordan Brown from Charlotte, big kid. And then I think right before the spring game or right after, Connor Scaglione. Sounds like he should be in Goodfellas. Kid from Princeton that's a grad transfer, has 1 year eligibility. And as far as our recruiting class, this was really the biggest focus. So we bring in Gabriel Fortson from North Cobb. He's already enrolled. Elias Cloy from Alpharetta. Benjamin Galloway from Hillgrove. I think he was our highest rated recruit at 87. Patrick Screws from Uvalde, Alabama. And Ethan McKinney from Lassiter. So looks like we got 3 leaving, and how many we got coming in? 7. So you would think our offensive line gets better. And as far as, stepping up this season, aside from special teams, offensive line has got to be a place we really need to step up if we want to be successful. Now, not a lot to write home about at tight end. There hadn't been for some time at Tech, probably in 20 years. Ben Postma transfers out. He has not found a landing spot. But we bring in Brett Seether from UGA, which you would hope really steps up at tight. Like, we need a tight end with some production, be it blocking, catching, whatever. Tight end has been just this, just abyss really at Tech for, since Collins has taken over. Now, we also bring in Jackson Long from University of South Florida, but, who knows what we're getting with him. All I know is he dropped the first pass to a tight end at the spring game, and it just did not instill a lot of confidence in me. Now, on defensive line, obviously, Keon White we lose. He was drafted in the 2nd round by New England. We also lose I should have said William Lay. William Lay's an offensive lineman, but we lose William Lay, offensive lineman, to graduation. But on the defensive line, obviously, Keon White, it's really difficult to replace a kid like Keon White. We're really going to have some kids step up in production. But we also lose KJ Miles to Temple. I don't remember hearing his name a ton. Gray Carroll transfers to Liberty. And the one that really just doesn't sit right with me is Akilo Stone going to Ole Miss. This was a kid that didn't have some out-of-this-world season last year, but was really, really stepping up in the spring of this year. And then all of a sudden goes to Ole Miss. Now, we've had other players go to Ole Miss that it seems like probably reached out to them and said, hey, if you come here, here's the NIL setup we have, which is usually called tampering. But I don't know how you get around it. Now, we bring in Edinoza Rubin from Clemson. Recently brought in Eddie Kelly from University of South Florida that a lot of people are high on. On the recruiting side, we bring in Shameik Jones from Camden, South Carolina. He is already enrolled. Ezra Odinger from Alatoona. Bryson Dixon from Leroy, Alabama. And Malcolm Pugh from Leroy, Alabama. So we get 2 from Leroy. Now at linebacker, this is probably the biggest loss on Tech's entire team was the loss of Charlie Thomas and Ace Ely to graduation. Replacing Keon White, Charlie Thomas, Ace Ely is going to be very tough. Charlie Thomas goes to the Browns as an unsigned free agent, and Ace Ely goes to the Panthers. We also lose Contavion Franks. He has not found a place in the portal, and Demetrius Knight, who has not found a place in the portal either. But there is good news. This is probably where we did the best, in my opinion, in the portal other than wide receiver. We bring in Andre White from Texas A&M, a very, very talented linebacker, was a 4-star. They signed, and Braylon Oliver from Minnesota. This is a kid from Douglasville that I thought looked really good in the spring game. Big, strong kid that can move. I'm not saying they will, but these are 2 kids that could replace Thomas and Ely as far as what they were to the Georgia Tech defense last year. Now, we also bring in Austin Dean from Rutgers. He wasn't even starting at Rutgers, so who knows what we're really getting with him. On the recruiting side, we bring in Ashton Heflin from Noonan, who is already enrolled. Jacob Cruz from Norcobb. Tay Seymour from South Atlanta, and then Nakari Ashley from Marietta. Now, Nakari Ashley, if I remember, is kind of a hybrid defensive end linebacker player. I think he's like 6'5", so he could play linebacker or defensive line. I would think probably ends up playing defensive line, but we will see. Defensive backs. Another kid we lose to Ole Miss is Amari Walton. Oh boy, wonder if he called a kilo stone. Anyways, we lose Derek Allen to North Carolina. I hope we beat North Carolina Ole Miss 1,000-0 this year. Jalen Huff goes to Florida Atlantic University, and then Kenny Bennett and Jeremiah Smith enter the portal, have not found a landing spot yet. Now we're bringing in Omar Daniels from Kansas State, Paul Mola from Idaho. This is a kid that had played at Notre Dame too. It's another kid a lot of people are high on that maybe has flown under the radar, just hasn't played to his potential for whatever reason. Now, Justin Brown transfers from Mississippi State. He was a wide receiver at Mississippi State. He gets a free transfer for unfortunately the passing of Mike Leach. Now, I didn't list him under wide receiver because in the portal he's listed as a safety, so I guess he's going to come to Tech and play defensive back, or that's my understanding. And then on the recruiting side, Stephen Jones Jr. from Gadsden City, Alabama. So again, a ton of change going on at Georgia Tech. We basically turned over 75% of our staff, and I don't know, maybe 25% of our roster through portal and graduation. But there's a lot of things to be excited about Georgia Tech in the future. I think we're moving in the right direction. We're getting the right pieces in place to compete for the ACC and to be successful. But again, this year is going to be probably the most important season Georgia Tech has ever had as far as positioning themselves in the recruiting landscape and in the conference realignment landscape, because if we lose in the conference realignment landscape, I mean, it's kind of over. If we're in a conference that's not considered Power 5, probably going to be impossible to recover from that. So Guys, let me know what you think. I apologize. I'm losing my voice. I actually lost it about a week ago. So y'all have a great Memorial Day weekend. Be safe, and it's going to be okay. Talk to you guys soon.